What's new in Windows 11?
And why the hell are we getting a new version of Windows? Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support. Hi there. Welcome to Vertical Hold Behind the Tech News, the tech podcast where we catch up with Australia's leading technology journalists to dive into the big tech stories of the week. And I think you can guess already which one we're diving into. I'm Adam Turner. I'm a little bit short of sleep like the others, and I'm joined, as always, by Alex Kidman and our fifth Beatle, finder, editor-in-chief, Angus Kidman, two Sydney-siders who are about to do another round of the lockdown shuffle. But looking back to happier times, all three of us have sat through at least a quarter century of Windows launches. Starting with you, Alex, what were your favourite Windows flops over the years?
Look, the two that come to mind, one is a retail product and one isn't. The glory of Windows ME,
Oh,
deep cut there in the Windows
Yeah.
pile, and the equal glory of, and this is rather journalist exclusive, and I have mentioned this on the podcast before, I think, the Windows XP boxer shorts. The only time a company has ever given me branded underwear.
Gus, can you top that?
Well, I've actually got branded underwear from many sources, so clearly I was just covering the better tech. I like diving into some of the weirder, dumber stuff. So there's this ridiculous feature around Win95, I think called Active Desktop, where you're basically going to get to embed little bits of web pages into your desktop. And it was a really good way to crash your system really quickly. I'll sort of give it that. But that was a thing that deserved to die, and die it did.
Oh, I'm going to be boring and go with one of the more obvious and more recent ones. The fact that nobody would listen when they told them that people hated Windows 8 and the tablet interface and they needed to give people a chance to change it back to Windows 7. Like, no, people love the tablet. And about a year later, you're all right. You can have your start bar back. You morons. And they may be, we'll get to this in a minute, they may be moving the start bar again. And I can't believe they would be that stupid.
You're very traumatized by that. You can't. It was called Metro, you might recall.
Metro,
that's the name of the
yes.
interface.
Or modern. They interchangeably
They couldn't
use
even
the
make
naming.
up their mind what it was called. That tells you how badly they're running things over there. But so that's where we are at this point. We're recording the show at a very different time schedule this week due to Microsoft deciding to announce this thing at 1 a.m. our time on a Friday, which is a great time to reveal a secret operating system. Only, Alex, Windows 11 wasn't really that much of a secret, was it? What did we hear from Microsoft that we didn't already know?
Well, as it turns out, quite a bit. So there was a leak of an early build of Windows 11 that hit the internet last week, and people did a deep dive into the visuals of that. So we knew some of the visual elements that were coming, stuff like the start menu moving to the middle of the screen and what they're calling snap layouts. So currently you can snap windows around in a Windows 10 system by dragging them around, but it's a kind of manual process. This is a thing which will have like dedicated layouts of specific squares and rectangles, so you can have a lot more apps running at the same time. We already knew all of that stuff. There was a lot of detail, though, that they hadn't gone into, or that wasn't immediately evident, around some of the changes that they're making to some of the pre-installed apps. So, for example, Adam, this is going to make you super, super happy. Skype is no longer pre-installed in favor of your favorite Microsoft Teams.
No! The 11th plague of Egypt. It's official.
It is official, but the point here is more Skype itself is not specifically dying unless you're on Skype for Business. That's got till July. But consumers will need to install Skype themselves. It's pre-installed on Windows 10. Instead, you'll get the Teams chat functionality built into Windows. They're doing a lot more bundling here as well, because they're also pre-installing the Xbox app. And this is the thing that lets you access Game Pass. It's part of their bigger push towards gaming-style features. Gus,
they must be kicking themselves they didn't do those two things 18 months ago.
It probably would have helped, yes.
Yeah.
But, Gus, so there's the new kind of visual style, and they're also talking up a more friendly tablet interface, haptic feedback on stylus, and bigger UI elements. But I know you're a man who's really, really keen on keyboard usage of Windows. Do you think that this is going to work for you?
It's not going to get any easier, but this has been the direction that Windows has gone in for a decade. I know that I'm a keyboard shortcut freak, but I know that most people aren't. Most people rely on a mouse, or now they rely on touch. So the enhancements that are coming to the keyboard in Windows 11 are very much around, hey, we're going to give you a better touchscreen keyboard for those moments when you're using it in tablet mode. So I've made my peace with that because, you can always add things in to make it work. It's probably a sensible direction to go in. And if they can get the on-screen keyboard right, that is really important because we know this is an area where nobody's ever done a perfect version of this. No matter what tablet you're using, there's stuff that goes wrong. So I'm going to be positive about that and get ready to install all my favorite old hacky things so that I can use the keyboard the way that I want to.
But tell them the price, son. Tell them the price.
Well, so this is the interesting one. As was kind of predicted, if you're on a Windows 10 PC, it's going to be a free upgrade. Although the upgrade path they're doing, similar to what they did with Windows 10, it won't be, here's day one, everyone get Windows 11. They'll tell you when you're allowed to upgrade, apparently from early next year, although they'll be offering Windows 11 on new hardware this year.
Do you think there'll be that thing that we've seen in the past where people will be scrambling to try and keep the Windows 10 machines because they don't like what they see with Windows 11?
I think there'll definitely be an element of that, and certainly, the standard advice of don't rush to install a new operating system applies for anyone. Equally, of course, there will be people trying to work out, are there hacky ways I can get Microsoft to authorize me for full Windows 11? And I suppose if you're super, super keen, they have actually said that they will have an early version of it available on the Windows Insider channel from next week. But you've got to be very, very keen on Windows to be a Windows Insider, frankly.
So what about changes in terms of hardware requirements? Because that's always been one of the struggles with Windows in the past. And the further you go back, probably the worse it gets in terms of my old hardware was happily running Windows whatever, but now it just runs like a dog on this new version of Windows.
Well,
can you put it on any hardware? How's it going to run?
There's one really big important thing here. I think the single most important change here is that, we are now talking 64-bit. This is the world that you're living in.
Yeah.
You can still run 32-bit apps, but we are entirely talking a 64-bit universe here. And so this is going to disqualify some older systems on that basis. There's a tool you can run to see if you can install the upgrade. I tried it on my aging Surface 2 as soon as they launched the tool, and you know what? I can't update that baby. That thing's not moving any further along the line.
To be fair, a Surface 2 is a slightly older machine. Although, there's a couple of qualifiers to that, Gus. You're right. You need a 64-bit CPU, which is kind of, depends on exactly your machine, but kind of maybe 5-6 years worth of machines.
5 would have been my guess.
That will qualify there. You also need to pass certain security checks. You need to have a Trusted Platform Module 2 is, I think, the specific qualification. And Surface is interesting. I've seen a lot of reports early on of people with relatively modern Surfaces failing the Microsoft check. So they may backpedal on this as well. There may be some changes coming there. It's also, I think, really important to point out, 64-bit is hardware only. They're still going to support 32-bit software apps.
Oh, absolutely.
You've got to have a 64-bit processor, though. And this is kind of like the step that Apple took with its own setups some time ago, where it jumped over to 64-bit, and for a while the 32-bit apps were available. Microsoft presumably is actually going to keep those rolling for a bit longer. Otherwise, though, there's not a whole lot of other changes in terms of what you need hardware-wise. The other big thing, though, to point out is there's a lot more of an internet requirement. You've got to verify. You must have a Microsoft account. That's no longer a standalone kind of option. And they're making, the terrible, horrible, painful Windows S mode. I don't know if either of you two have ever played with S mode. They're making that a Windows Home thing only.
I don't think anyone's going to sob over that particular change. That's going to be just fine.
For those not aware of it, Windows S Mode is the super lockdown Microsoft Store version of Windows 10. Basically, you can't just download apps and install it on a Windows S machine, which brings us neatly around to one of their big nuclear changes, which is the Microsoft Store. First up, they're having a big old attack on Apple and Google's 30% developer cut, aren't they, Gus?
Well, yeah, so it's interesting. They've kind of announced, this has been an ongoing thing, this idea that you take 30% or even 15%, the idea that you'd sneak stuff. So the big headline out of this is they're saying, oh, okay, if you want to continue using our payment platform, our commerce systems with your apps, that's fine. We'll continue to take a 15% cut. But if you want to bring in your own payment systems, we won't take anything. You can do it absolutely for free. And that is directly firing at Google and Apple. But I do have to point out something that's not in their main announcement. When you dig into it, gets into that, they have specifically said that ruling does not apply to PC games. PC games, you still have to go through Microsoft. So they're not letting go of that bit of it. I still think this is obviously really good news. If you're someone like a Netflix, you're going to like this. You're maybe not going to be so thrilled about that if you're in Epic Games, because it doesn't actually change anything on that front.
But, well, actually, if you're an Epic Games or a Steam, you're not going to be happy with Microsoft full stop, because as I said before, they're bundling the Xbox app in there. And that, apart from giving you access to Xbox Game Pass, which is obviously its key appeal, they sell games through that thing. It is a straight-up bundling. In the classic old, IE was bundled with Windows 98, and that got the DOJ angry that we all remember so well. It's that kind of bundling in there. The big game store providers are not going to love this, regardless of whether or not Microsoft's taking a cut.
Yeah, I look forward to lots of legislative action in the European Union going on around that one. But it is very true for the gaming side. I still do think it's really interesting that Microsoft has basically decided to say the way to make ourselves stand out in this space is to go, hey, we're not going to rip you off the way that those guys at Apple and Google do. So
it's not at all subtle.
The worm has turned. Microsoft and all this, we want to be an open platform and love everyone. It's like, we remember when you guys were trying to screw everybody else because you could. And now that you're the underdog, you're like, let's be friends.
Well, they've still got a huge market share. They're not exactly the underdog when you consider how many Windows PCs there are.
You know what I mean. I can see Gates and Balmer in the day would be like, no, over my dead body.
The other big change, though, coming to the Windows Store and coming to Windows 11 are Android apps on the desktop.
Again, Gates and Balmer in the distance going, no!
You've been able to do this via third-party apps, BlueStacks and things like that for a while as a kind of bodge. This is going to be official, but it's still sort of a bodge, isn't it, Gus? It's a weird setup.
It's it's very much the official bodge, because you can search for the apps within the Microsoft Store, but then you actually install them through the Amazon App Store, and then they're going to run using Intel technology to kind of emulate on there. So, and we know from the experience of doing this on Android that, it's okay using the Amazon kind of App Store, but apps still have to be set up for it. So it doesn't mean that the whole of the Android world is opened up to you straight away. There's a bunch of things you won't be able to see. Most of the big popular ones are on there, but there's going to be some gaps. So, it feels bodgy, but it's going to work out for some people just purely on that level. There's a few things you'd like to be able to synchronize. And the real test for this will be how well you can actually integrate those things. So can you kind of do things like slide from your WhatsApp chat on your Android phone into the one on your desktop? Microsoft is saying there'll be a lot of this. They're saying that when they show recent apps on the start menu, that'll show recent apps and recent docs from all the things you're using. So that will potentially work well. But I guess we have learned, the experience has been, that hasn't always worked so well when Apple's tried it even, has it?
No, it hasn't. It hasn't, definitely.
The other question here is, what is the Amazon App Store like in Australia? Because I don't have first-hand experience with it in Australia, but I do have first-hand experience dealing with Amazon, and we are always an afterthought. Do we get access to the store at all? Do we get the full spread of apps that they get in the US?
So far, the answer is yes, we do. You can get apps through the Amazon App Store for those tiny limited number of people, for example, who bought an Amazon Fire tablet when they're on sale here. It was never a huge market, but there wasn't much of a sense of it being super restricted beyond the obvious, like geo-restricted, no HBO Max kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I guess what this could do, though, is it could really light a fire under the Amazon App Store, because suddenly they can say to Android developers, well, hey, you want to sell a whole bunch more of your apps? We can do that for you through Windows 11. So we might see more of those apps that aren't currently there coming through. But, there is that whole thing of Android apps which were never built for a Windows-style UI running that way. It's already sort of hard enough to get some of those apps to work nicely on Android tablets as it is. So this could be big, and certainly it fills that huge hole left by that thing that used to be called Windows Phone.
I was going to say, if only Microsoft had its own phone platform.
but how crazy an idea with that. Yeah. Well, they do have that Surface Duo thing, but they never bought it here. But this could be big, and it's certainly, again, it's another positioning statement for Microsoft to be able to say, "Hey, we do a similar thing to the way Apple does it, but more open." Without having to necessarily run it themselves, of course. Because if there's any problems, it's like, oh well, you'll have to talk to Amazon about that, or oh look,
Mm.
that's a problem with the Intel Bridge technology, but we'll get them to look into it and get back to you.
There seems to be a lot of doing what Apple does here.
Yeah, but in a very Microsoft kind of way. This is still very much Windows. It still largely looks like Windows. They're just adapting. I think they're adapting to what an awful lot of the market wants. One of the bigger changes that they've got is live tiles are dying in favor of widgets. And that's a very kind of Android-y thing. Apple kind of reluctantly in a grumbly way adapted widgets. But you'll now have the ability to shift to a widgets view for a quick kind of live view of your socials or whatever other info you need. And Microsoft's pitch for that is the whole idea of, you won't have to look down at your phone to kind of check this stuff because you'll be able to just access it direct from your Windows desktop. Gus, do you think that's a feature that people will love?
I'm going to say no. I just don't. I don't know that. I feel like a lot of these things. I feel like this about the widget environment generally. Widgets, as you say, they've been available on Android forever, on iOS for a decent amount of time. The experience suggests, the data suggests, most people don't use them. Most people just continue getting on with their life in a regular sort of way. So I think they need it for the competitive advantage, but I can't help wondering if this is going to go the way of kind of previous attempts to sort of do this stuff, because it assumes a level of customization that I just don't think most people can be bothered with. So if it takes off, it'll be because you're getting aggressively nudged to do it all the time. And if you're getting aggressively nudged to do it all the time, then Adam's head is going to explode, because yet again, he's going to have to explain to his parents why they don't need to pay attention to that. And it's not a problem. And it's also not a scam. And it's not some kind of in-store weirdness. So I don't know that it's going to make a super huge amount of difference, but I get why it's been put in there.
What do we think of that new UI? Did Windows need to be kind of decluttered and iconified?
No, I don't understand why Windows doesn't need to be sexy. It's the Volvo of operating systems. I don't see anyone complaining about it. Am I wrong?
But have you ever had sex in a Volvo?
That's a different
That's a
podcast.
very different podcast.
That is a different podcast. That is that is the sealed section.
Yeah, this is the risk. People are familiar with things they like that look the same, and the immediate reaction to any change in any kind of at the icon level, people go, "Oh, what do I need that for? I knew what the old one was for," and you have to put up with that. But the reality is, this happens. We've lived through 7 generations of this. In 6 years' time, when we get to Windows 12 or Windows 14, they'll probably skip Windows 13. We'll be used to it. I think, honestly, so much of that is just habit. Like, people get hooked on, oh no, this doesn't work, this is terrible. And it's like, and everyone's a design expert for a day, and then everyone gets over themselves.
I think if they've got any brains at all, they will build a make me look like Windows 10 mode in, because that's what they needed to do in Windows 8, and they eventually gave up and gave you that option. But there will be people like my parents are in their 70s, right? They use their computer for basic things. They don't need this in their life. They just need it to keep working. And if I could say to them, look, click, here's a button, looks like Windows 10 again, and you're off, save me a lot of headaches, save them a lot of headaches. They really need to build that option in there rather than let people, because or else people will go and make it themselves. There's
Exactly.
always mods.
Although-
But they shouldn't
Will
have
do
to.
that.
Microsoft should just do that. It's just a common courtesy.
Although the thing is, it's not as though Windows 10 is being taken, out the back of the barn with the shotgun. They've got an announced end of life date for that, but it's in like late 2025. It's 4 years from now, and yes, obviously there will be some computers still running then that are running now and that have been running for years, because some people do keep them for that long. But Windows 10 itself is still going to be around for a reasonable length of time. I think people's first interaction with this will be when they've accidentally set fire to their laptop to delete some data on the hard drive, and when they have to then pick up a new machine that suddenly has this different interface.
Or Microsoft does that bastard act and tricks people into installing it like they did with Windows 10. It was terrible. It was really bad what they did.
It was very
Tricking
bad for people who
with
didn't. Yeah. Oh, it's just an update.
Confusing
Oh,
notification. No, but they were confusing people with confusing notifications and confusing windows. They were really using bloody social engineering tricks to trick people into upgrading into Windows 10. It was appalling what they did to people. And I'll be interested to see if they've learnt their lesson or if they pull that same crap again with Windows 11 once they want to get everybody off Windows 10.
Yeah, and we'll have to wait and see, because while we're getting a preview of it, yeah, those things can evolve over time. That kind of trick isn't necessarily pulled the day it comes out. That becomes the thing when you're trying to bring things in. So we will have to see. And there's certainly space to make those kind of subtle adjustments, and to maybe go, hey, the people who are getting updates, just keep it similar. Maybe if you get a new machine, the default does become, that's where you're landing. But you would hope people would learn those lessons. But on the other hand, whoever learned anything in technology.
But these are the people who haven't learned the lesson, don't move the start bar. So, what other lessons haven't they learned?
Well, Adam, I guess one of the things that your parents won't have to deal with quite as badly is Windows updates. The claim is that they're going to be smaller, they're going to be more in the background, less of that kind of, we need to restart right now while you're in the middle of something kind of thing.
Yes, and that's what they need to do, is they need to take the pain out of this stuff. I mean, for people like us, we get this stuff, we're used to it, but we are power users. Your average person doesn't want to know this stuff, doesn't want to see this stuff. And the amount of time I spend on the phone with my mother-in-law dealing with this stuff is crazy. So it's nice to see them, again, going down a little bit more of that Apple-esque path of, yes, we will make this stuff just work and a lot less traumatic, hopefully.
Oh, I'm sorry, I've got to take issue with you there, Adam. If you're trying to claim that Apple does this stuff better than Microsoft, then I think you've been drinking the Kool-Aid for too long. Consistently, Microsoft, I'm not going to say it's perfect by any means, but it has long had the ability to say we'll install this stuff out of sequence. Apple's had the ability to dismiss it for ages, and then you end up with stuff that's just running sluggishly because people don't have to update for ages. So I think both sides can learn something from each other there.
True, but how many times have they had to run Windows Update 8 times to force it to install all the updates and restart your machine 3 times in the middle before it will actually recognize things? It's a nightmare.
Yeah. Well, they are claiming that the whole thing will run everything faster and it's more secure, although that is straight out of the every version of Windows launch playbook ever. That's what they say every single time. So that's very much a kind of wait and see prospect. But hopefully they can make it a little bit more streamlined, because that streamlined look is very much big and a big part of what they're pushing for. Maybe that'll just require fewer resources.
Yeah. What I'm really looking forward to is, in this new slick modern interface that we've got, what is the blue screen of death going to look like? Like, is it going to have a new feel to it?
It'll be a gorgeous shade of blue. It'll be the most beautiful shade of blue you've ever seen. It'll be like, oh. Going back to what we're saying about the transition, do you think from a software perspective, this will be a much easier transition? Because from when we moved to Windows 10, the Microsoft Office subscriptions and basically subscription software in general was nowhere near as ubiquitous as it is now. So when you move to Windows 11, it's fair to assume that, the Office suite will be ready for it on day one, and your other software suites will be able to move to it, your Adobes and your whatever else, because you won't have to, you're now forced to buy the next version of Premiere or whatever because it won't run on the old one. They'll just roll that into their incremental updates.
Yeah, it's going to be an easier transition because we live in a subscription world. You'll sign in with that account. It's much more like the experience we expect to get on phones. And I think the really painful stuff for this, probably around the 7 to 8 era, there was a kind of point where Microsoft did kind of jettison a certain bunch of people and go, right, you just can't get there. So I think that'll happen. Again, there will be some glitches, but at this juncture, you're not going to have those endless lists of things that go wrong. Again, the interesting era, the era where this will all go spectacularly wrong, because it usually is actually the gaming side of it. That's often the things that blow up in unexpected ways.
Yeah, although it's kind of interesting to compare what's happened with Apple here, with their shift to Apple Silicon, the whole M1 thing. If you look at what's happened with Adobe, that's a total subscription product. You subscribe to Creative Cloud and however many apps you want. But Adobe's actually been really, really slow at kicking towards those ARM-based versions of its key apps. Like Photoshop was very early on, and obviously that is the big cash cow for Adobe. But it's been much, much slower for some of the smaller parts of Creative Cloud to jump there. Weirdly, Windows got a bit of a benefit from some of that because, of course, you've got the ARM version of Windows 10 that runs on like the Surface Pro X, and Samsung's got an ARM-based Windows machine as well. But I wonder if we won't see a bit of that kind of split schizophrenic stuff where it's like this is upgraded and improved for Windows 11, but this bit isn't from some of those subscription packages.
Yeah. But again, I don't think you'll see that. Yeah, that whole scale collapse you can see when Apple does processor shifts. And of course, they've been through that before, precisely because Windows, right from the start, has always said, look, we've got to deal with a whole bunch of hardware. We've got to deal. So you don't always get the optimizations, but you also don't get the hideous compatibility in the back end. So I think it's actually safe to assume that that part of it goes more smoothly because you always had this broader church you were trying to deal with.
So what you're saying is that my PS2 connected Kensington trackball will still work.
You know, I would not be surprised. One of my favorite games to play with any version of Windows, and I did it with 10, and I'll be doing it with 11, is digging through and seeing how many bits that look like, oh yeah, I remember that from actually being from like 7 versions ago. Like, it's really hard to get rid of everything. So, you'll install the device driver of that. There'll be a brief thing saying, oh, hey, we have to run this in compatibility mode. And then you'll get something that feels like Windows 3.1 sitting in front of you, letting you configure it.
You're probably not wrong. You're probably not wrong at all.
Gus, do they need to come to terms with nobody cares about Windows and they should just be focusing on Office?
No, I don't think they do. And actually, I think we're very dismissive of Windows. We live in this universe. We go, oh, yeah, that feels like old school technology. This is still a big deal. Like, it is 84% of the PC market in Australia. Like, I sometimes think people feel like, oh, yeah, we live in a Mac universe. We actually don't. We live in a Windows universe. But I think it is true that it doesn't need, like, it's not something that needs to get exciting. It's not something where they need to go, wow, let's radically reinvent this, because this is used in loads of businesses. Businesses hate retraining. Businesses don't want anything to change. So the fact that we've just been through effectively 6 years where Windows officially hasn't changed. We've been on Windows 10 since 2015. For most Windows users, that's a good thing. And it lines up with the broader thing that happens in tech these days, which is, yeah, we're not seeing things change at the same thing, and we're not turning over devices at the same pace we used to. Like, people just don't update their computers as much. And when they're on their computers, half the time, let's face it, they're just in the browser. They're barely looking at what the operating system is doing. So I think it's okay for it to be a slow and measured changeover, but it's a good occasion to step up and remind people, hey, we're actually doing something to this thing. It's not just sitting quietly, rotting away in the corner.
Well, the elephant in the room here, though, is that Microsoft did actually say, hey, Windows 10 is going to be the last version of Windows.
Yeah.
11 seems a little wrong in that context. But I guess the other bigger problem they've got, and you're right, Gus, we live in a Windows world, is Windows has so much history. I mean, we were talking about, 25 years of us covering it, but it goes back further than that. And it has to do so many things for so many people that I think in some ways it becomes a little bit of an anchor for Microsoft, because it can't change too much, not just in the UI and the retraining of people, but in terms of the applications that people want to support. You've got your enterprise people who are going to move very slowly, and they won't be jumping to Windows 11 anytime soon if they don't have to. But you've also got consumers out there who've got old software, old apps, especially old games, and a lot of those, with a little bit of work, it's true, will still run on Windows 10, even though they might have been written for, DOS-based Windows, for Windows 3 or earlier. You can, if you're very determined, run software on Windows 10 that was written before Windows existed.
Yeah, it's a good way to go insane. But yeah, there is definitely, there's a mark of that, and there is a much bigger corporate market that still has old stuff, and this has been reflected. Yeah, we talked about this a few episodes ago on the podcast that, as, Microsoft finally tries to say, right, we're fully killing off IE, there were still people who relied on features in that. Like, the path of switching off technology is so slow. So we have to expect that Windows, which runs on all these devices, is going to evolve slowly, and that's not a bad thing. But it does still come back to that central thing of saying, well, then why suddenly go, oh, we need a new number? Why not just keep doing incremental upgrades to Windows as a service, which is what Windows 10 was promoted by? And I guess sometimes it comes down to, like, people do like a new name, they do like a new number. Just occasionally you've got to buy into the hype, even if you're not going to go back to the glory days of lining up at midnight outside your local Harvey Norman in order to pick up a boxed copy.
If I was one of those Windows fanboys, though, I'd be afeared. I'd be very afeared, because we are due for a dud version of Windows. Think about it. Every second version of Windows is a dud. One comes along like Vista or Windows 8 that reinvents everything, which is code for breaks everything. And then the next one comes along like Windows 7 or Windows 10 that fixes everything. And everybody praises it, and it settles down and becomes stable. And everyone says, oh, isn't Windows so wonderful? Isn't Windows so reliable? And then they go and break it again. Windows 11 there's going to be a break in it one, isn't it?
Well, yes, probably, because yes, this is a well-established pattern that people have generally looked at. The one thing that makes that hard to call is that we have actually had all these substantive half-year updates going on over a period of 6 years. So
They've
it's
been
possible
slowly
that the actual
breaking it.
it's possible is that the wrecked version might have been 3 versions ago. Because if you look at a Windows 10 system now, it is not the same as Windows 10 was when it came out in 2015. So there is a statistical chance that we'll get past that, but there is absolutely a statistical chance that we are heading into a world of hurt. And I can remember the screaming headaches I got writing about Vista. Very profitable because people wanted to know about all the ways it was going wrong. So I shouldn't knock that. As journalists, we probably should be in favor of that. But I think it's a harder call to make in the era of an operating system that does evolve and where most people do get the updates online than back when you really could go, okay, well, this looks like we're kind of sliding out the door. So I think we'll have to wait till we're further into the beta cycle and people have really played with this stuff before we work out just how much of what little hair we've got left we're going to be ripping out.
But the thing, I mean, and this is just the classic thing, and this is not just Windows, this is Mac OS, this is any operating system you care to name, is by and large, it's a very bad idea to upgrade on day one, whether it's beta software or even the final version of Windows 11. I mean, I'm sure all three of us will, at some time in the next few months, write a sentence basically saying, don't upgrade on day one.
Yeah, pray for me.
I mean, as tech journalists, we have to.
Yes.
We're taking the bullet for you here, people, in that sense, because we will be throwing this onto systems. But even, with the benefit of hindsight and experience, we'll be doing it on systems where we've got something we can kind of back up and work to if it all goes pear-shaped, which odds are in some way it will.
We could just set the computer on fire.
I hear that's very popular these days. But speaking of setting things on fire, or certainly speaking of making things hot, we were talking about it making it a kind of attractive, sexy, making people interested and hyped in it. And this seems odd to me in a way because, Gus, you were talking about the massive, massive market share that Windows has. You're not wrong. Why do you need to make it hot again if you're already the big incumbent? Who's the threat?
Well, the threat is this perception that it's there and you use it when you have to, but you don't want to, and you don't use it very much. You do have a large cohort of people for whom now most of their technology experience is on their phone, and that's actually the thing that the mass population uses as their computing device, and they have an expectation of how that works and how they're going to interact with it. And the computing, broadly speaking, as soon as you get onto any kind of desktop slash laptop computer, the experience is nothing like that. And so there's an ambition to say, hey, we could do that. And it has to be said, the disaster that was Metro/Modern aside, Microsoft has done a pretty decent job of getting touch to work within this environment, certainly kilometers ahead of anything that Mac OS has ever pretended it wanted to do in that space.
Well, Mac OS doesn't do touch, so it's automatically ahead.
Exactly.
Ahead.
But yeah,
by default.
Yeah, the fact that they've explored that and they can get into that, there is the possibility that you can start trying to do that again. And you have to tread carefully because they have messed that up in some ways in the past. But I do think there's room to go, hey, we do know that people have these fundamentally different interactions. I think there's room to surface the things that they've done that nobody ever plays with much. A good example of that is Cortana, the voice recognition that's on Windows. Now, unlike you guys...
Speaking of killing things with fire...
Well, but unlike you guys, I work on Windows all the time. I actually am a regular Windows user. I've never used Cortana outside the context of testing it to say how awful it is. It's never once occurred to me to go ahead and do that. So I think there are points where we've got to go, hey, we have to try and engage with these new interfaces and try and bring in options for them, even if the reality is that most people are going, right, when I need a certain level of grunt, when I'm at that point where a browser-based thing just doesn't work and I want actual multitasking that works properly, then, they'll go in and they'll do things. But I think there's still room to try and surface that stuff.
Well, that just about wraps up another episode of Vertical Hold. Thanks to Gus for pouring out a coffee and joining us at this early hour.
Pleasure as always.
So, you're a long-term guest on the show, so you know how this goes. The 3 classic questions. Where can people find your social media online? Where can they find your work online? And the big contentious question of the moment, which sitcom is the all-time greatest?
Okay, so people can find me on social media at GusWorldAU. People can find my work online at finder.com.au. Sitcom that's the all-time greatest is such a contentious question to ask a man who literally has a lounge room filled with DVDs of sitcoms. So it's a really...
You should be the expert, sir. I mean, I may have to slap you if you get the answer wrong, but you should have an opinion.
Well, I have many opinions, but yeah. But also, you know what? If I'm just going to have to go for sheer quality, not a single moment that's gone wrong, very watchable, and not necessarily requiring knowledge of a lot of 1980s pop culture references. I'm just setting myself up for getting beaten up by brother by not saying anything he wants. I do think it's very just hard to slip past Faulty Towers. You've just got to work with the classics. So.
True.
Ooh, very old school.
very old
Some
school.
problematic references there, though, I think. But
yeah, not necessarily politically correct.
But you turned into our father so casually that I barely even noticed. And as always, you can catch us online at verticalhold.au on Twitter, at verticalhold.com.au, or via the Vertical Hold Facebook page.
And once again, thanks everyone for listening and bearing with us. We know we're a little bit late this week, but we wanted to give you all the latest on Windows 11. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to tell your friends about us. Leave us a review on your podcasting platform of choice and help us spread the good word. Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support. I think people are perhaps overlooking the ancient elephant in the room, and I'm not talking Seinfeld, I'm talking older than Seinfeld. MASH. Or is it a workplace comedy? Does MASH count as a sitcom?
This was
MASH
the
does not
final
count.
episode
No.
of Vertical Hold. It's been a pleasure, people. And
MASH won Emmy Awards. MASH has got to be. If you count it as a sitcom, it's got to be up there.
Well, we were just we were asked to pick one. If you want me to start doing 5, it turns into a much
I know.
longer
We're doing a top
conversation.
5. We're doing a top 5. It just becomes another half hour of podcast.
It's a separate thing when we roll out our podcast all about the young ones, but that's a whole other
Yes.
story as well. So.
Drinks like a fish.